The interstate system has roads stretching throughout the U.S. Some interstates run as long as 3,000 miles, like I-90, the longest in the country. When talking about how many highways have been built and how long they really are, I don't think people really get how many interstates there are. The system required 400,000 cubic yards of concrete, which would be enough to build 6 sidewalks to the moon. There are some massive highways, and these highways stretch through several states on their way from coast to coast or border to border. So today I thought it would be interesting to go over the interstates that go through the most US states. Sure, these end up being a lot of the longest interstates in the country, but it strays away from just length. It really depends on the exact route you take and how it makes its way across the country. Before we get into the video though, make sure you do subscribe to the channel. We make geography content like this every week, so if you enjoy learning about roads, cities, and the interstate system, click the subscribe button below so you don't miss any future uploads. Thank you. Most major 1 or 2 digit interstates go through multiple states, with the shorter ones going through just 2 and the longest going through over 10. We could go over every interstate, but if we're talking about the top of the list, we have to look at the top 15. Why is this? Well, there are 7 interstates that go through just 6 states, so that ends up being a long tie for 9th place. Because they're technically in the top 10, let's go over the tied states and then get into the top 8. The first of which is Interstate 81, which is 855 miles long while traveling up the Mid-East from Tennessee up to the Canadian border. Second would be Interstate 64, which moves west to east from around the center of the country in Missouri for 963 miles all the way to the Hampton Roads metropolitan area on the east coast. Next is Interstate 55, a long 964-mile highway that sort of follows the Mississippi River down the center of the country. This one goes from Chicago down to southern Louisiana. Continuing on, I-15 is another long and very notable route out west that travels from San Diego through San Bernardino into Las Vegas and into Salt Lake City before heading up to the Canadian border, with a total length of 1,433 miles. With 3 more tied with 6, we have I-20, which travels across the southern U.S. from western Texas all the way to South Carolina, passing through cities like Dallas and Atlanta on its 1,539-mile journey. I-35 is also in this category, heading north to south across the center of the U.S. states. This one travels through a lot of land, but a lot of this 1,569-mile route is taken up by Texas and other large states. Finally, I-75 moves from Florida all the way up to Michigan at a length of 1,786 miles. It takes a very long path, but with a lot of it being within either Michigan, Florida, or Georgia, it really doesn't pass through too many total. So those are the 7 highways that just missed the main list, only passing through 6 states. That's a lot, but much of those were longer interstates that actually ended up going through less than you'd expect. The top 8 are where it starts getting into ones that maybe take a short route through some states and get their numbers up. So it ends up kind of showing long interstates with interesting paths. Getting into 7th place, we have Interstate 94. So I-94 is a 1,555-mile interstate route that connects the northern Great Plains to the Great Lakes region. It's known as the most northern east-west interstate and ends up being fairly unused for this part of its journey. The highway passes through major Great Lakes cities such as Minneapolis, Madison, Milwaukee, Chicago, and Detroit, being probably the best example of a Great Lakes mega-region connector. It goes through 7 states, with the number being run up mostly by the stretch where it's forced to push south around Lake Michigan and goes through Illinois and Indiana. It's in Illinois for just 61 miles and Indiana for even less at 46 miles. It's in Wisconsin for the longest portion at 341 miles. That was the only highway that passes through 7 states, but there are 3 separate interstates that go through 8, so we'll cover those in order of length. By that logic, Interstate 69 would be next. Now this one I'll say straight off the bat is a bit sketchy, since it isn't technically in 8 states yet. See, I-69 is an incomplete interstate, and there are only signed portions in 6 states. The proposed length will go through 8 different states on a long stretch from the Rio Grande Valley all the way up to the Canadian border in Michigan, which would form yet another border-to-border highway. Currently, it's at a length of 910 miles, being completed in Michigan and Indiana. Texas is yet to complete some of their portions, with the Louisiana and Arkansas problematically dormant in this project. Tennessee has a few portions that have been completed, but it's only 21 miles. Kentucky is working their way to being finished with 148 miles of completed roadway, and that's all the states which have completed anything to do with the highway. There have been many conversations about if it'll ever get funded and be finished, but these conversations will go on for decades as states continue to either attempt or not attempt to figure out their plans for I-69. Next up is Interstate 10, a longer interstate that passes through 8 states. Now this is the 4th longest interstate in the nation, with a total length of 2,460 miles. It's the southernmost transcontinental highway in the system, and was planned fully with the conception of the interstate system. It starts in Los Angeles, moving west across the desert until it reaches Phoenix and goes south to Tucson. After Tucson, it moves into Texas, where it spends much of its length, heading through El Paso, San Antonio, and the massive city of Houston. Moving on, it goes through New Orleans and ends in Jacksonville, Florida, being an extremely important route for the southern U.S. Now, for being so long, it could definitely go through more states, but as you can obviously see, Texas ruins this. It's within Texas for an entire 881 miles, being longer than many other interstates just on its own. Sure, this is offset by it quickly passing through Mississippi for 77 miles and Alabama for just 66, but the total length ends up at 8 states nonetheless. Moving on, we have another cross-country route with Interstate 40. Interstate 40 is another relatively southern route, being just under the middle line of the U.S. as it works its way nearly from coast to coast. It begins in Barstow, California, and follows Route 66 to Flagstaff, Gallup, New Mexico, Amarillo, Oklahoma City, and into the east. In Arkansas, it moves through Little Rock to the Tennessee border in Memphis. It then moves to Nashville and into North Carolina, where it hits Raleigh before turning south towards Wilmington. It's a long route with a diverse 2,559-mile length. The highway has its longest portion in Tennessee, traveling east-west through the long state. Other than that, it's interestingly pretty even between all the other states, with none having a length under 150 miles, though California is the shortest. An interesting little fact is that it was meant to end in Greensboro, but the Federal Highway Administration decided to extend it south to Wilmington later on, which explains the strange turn. Moving on to 4th place, we have a not technically cross-country interstate with Interstate 70. So I-70 starts in rural Utah, being a very strange starting point. It then continues into Colorado, crossing the mountains with one of the most iconic stretches of highway in the interstate system before reaching Denver. It then chugs its way through the Great Plains to Kansas City and then to St. Louis. And moving farther east, it pushes through Indiana, Columbus, and Pittsburgh before turning south and ending outside of Baltimore, Maryland. This is a total of 2,171 miles and passes through 10 states. Colorado is the longest stretch because of how it winds through the state at 450 miles. West Virginia is the complete opposite, with a tiny length of 14 miles as it touches the top of the state near Pittsburgh. That and Maryland, I would say, are the main reasons it gets so high on this list, as it's in both states for under 100 miles, which helps run the total up to 10. Into our top 3, we have Interstate 80. Now, I-80 is yet another east-west route, being our 4th straight. This is a 2,900-mile route from coast to coast, beginning in San Francisco and moving west to Salt Lake City. It has a very rural western portion, especially in Wyoming, Nebraska, Iowa, and honestly just up until it reaches Chicago. Even past then, it doesn't go through the most populated regions of really any state until it gets to its final state, New Jersey. It ends at the border with New York. This is the second longest interstate by total length in the U.S., which means it actually ends up cutting below its weight in the state's category. This is mostly because it's within Nebraska for 455 miles and Wyoming for another 402. The shortest is New Jersey, but that's still 68 miles. It doesn't just barely go through any states like our top 2. In 2nd place, we have the longest interstate in the country, Interstate 90. Now, I-90 is a behemoth of a route, taking a 3,021-mile trip from the Puget Sound to the Atlantic Ocean. It begins in Seattle, pushes through the rural west before finally reaching its second really large city with probably Madison, Wisconsin, or just Chicago. From there, it passes through Cleveland before a brief stint in Pennsylvania and then into New York. It passes Buffalo and turns into part of the New York Thruway, and then finally ends in Boston. Now, this has a lot of reasons for why it goes through 13 states. Obviously, it's the longest highway, but it's in Idaho for just 73 miles, Wyoming for 208, Wisconsin and Illinois for a relatively short period, and then just a tiny bit in Pennsylvania. I'd say this total is no surprise, and the bigger surprise is that it isn't first place, which would instead be Interstate 95, which blows it out with 16 different states as it makes its way up the East Coast. There are so many small states, and it finds a way to pass through basically all of them, with it not being short either. It begins in Miami, moving up the coast into Jacksonville before taking a relatively rural route through the Carolinas. Once it hits Richmond, it begins a generational run of population with the Northeast megalopolis, where it passes through Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Philadelphia, New York, New Haven, Providence, and Boston. After Boston, it finishes its 1,923-mile mission to get to the Canadian border. If you counted D.C., which is in for just 0.11 miles, it would be in 17 states. But no, instead it's within New Hampshire for the shortest period, at just 16 miles, with Delaware at 23.4 miles and New York for 23.5. It finds a way to reach all of these small states possible, which is why the total is so high. That's the entire list, though. It's surprising that a north-south highway tops the list, since the country is long, obviously. But the route that I-95 takes basically instantly explains it. I thought this would be a fun topic, so I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. Thank you to the members this week: Brock Sanders, Stephen Priestman, SB Wilder, Florida Jake, Thursday, JC17, Alex Williams, Mikita Martinov, Kurt Ainsley, Jerome McCall, KMS162, JL Bryson, Rosebud 4, Darkbird, Big Pasty, Wolflake 73, Snyderschwein, Benjamin Whitings, Ryan Devins, and Hazev the Wolf. Thank you.